Hang on, I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick. Okay, it's 5:30, so let's go ahead and get started today. All right, good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good, good. Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, excited for the end of the week. So hopefully you guys are too, but maybe not too excited because it probably I'm sure you guys have midterms starting up next week. At least I know for some of my classes I have some midterms coming up. Yeah, Isaac's in one of those classes. Okay. And so today the plan is I'm going to finish up the lecture notes 05 on arterial biomechanics. And so that, once we finish that, that should allow you to finish up the most recent homework. Okay. And so this most recent homework, it was kind of a weird mishmash because we've been talking about a lot of stuff, but a lot of it has been very conceptual in nature. So we haven't been doing that many calculations. And so that's why for that homework, you see a lot of, short answer questions because, a lot of just what we've been doing is just based on that. Okay. And so next week, I will say that there's going to be a shift. And so next week, we're going to be going over a method called the lump parameter method. My mind is on heat transfer right now. And what you'll see for that is that, we're going to do some intense calculations there. And it'll be our first time using MATLAB for something, really practical too. Okay. And so definitely look forward to that because it'll be tough, but I think it'll be really cool as well. All right, so for today's lecture, I'm starting here, and so you can see I'm not on my iPad yet, and so I'll switch back to it soon. But I did want to talk about your final projects a little bit. Okay? And so at this point, on Tuesday, if you remember, we completed our vascular workshop. Okay, and so I know, hopefully you guys are going to have a chance to finish up the tutorial and get it, and try it for yourself. But with all the information that you have armed, you should be able to get a good start on your projects. Okay. But the thing that the thing that you actually need for your final projects is a set of image data, right? And so you can't use the tutorial image set because that one's been done to death. But I do have a large variety of other image data available to you. Okay. And so I wanted to show you the website where you can look at all the ones that are available to you. Okay. And so to look at the repository, you're going to go to www.simvascular.org. And so same place where you downloaded your the Vascular software, but what you're going to click on right here is repository. Okay. And so if you never heard the term repository is just the name and just another name for a database. Okay. So it's basically where we store a bunch of the image data. Okay. And so you're going to click on repository, and then you can read this little blurb. So the vascular model repository, blah, 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 a bunch of stuff, doesn't matter. Okay. And then what you're going to click on is this link right here for visit the SV model repository. Okay. And I'll link this website in an announcement too, so so you don't have to kind of remember how to get here. Okay, and it's going to take you to this site right here called OSMSC, which stands for Open Source Medical Software Corporation. Okay, it's called a corporation, but it's just one dude who has a server in his room, so I don't know why he calls it a corporation. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to click on repository here. Okay, and then what you're going to see is you're going to see different categories of models here. Okay. And then these are sorted based on where they're located in the body. Okay. So first you have cerebral vascular models. And so these are blood vessels around your brain. You have aorta models. And so aorta models are fairly similar to the ones we did for the tutorial. Okay. So that's the, the blood vessel that kind of comes down in your body like that. Okay. Next, you have pulmonary models. So pulmonary, stands for the lungs. And so these are blood vessels that go to your lungs, right? Coronary models are models that, are blood vessels that wrap around your heart. Okay. You have congenital heart disease models, and so these are cases where for kids which are born with some kind of abnormality in their heart or their blood vessels, and so we've done some studies on that too. Okay. We have aorta femoral models, and so those are blood vessels that are kind of near your legs. And we also have some animal models too. And so I know a bunny is pictured here, but actually most of the data that we have is actually from sheep. Just the sheep are, sheep are larger and they're easier to image than bunnies. Okay. And so what you can do is you can click on these and you can see the kinds of models that are available to you. Okay. And so what I've clicked on here is cerebral vascular, and what you can see here are some of the models that we have available for you to do for your projects. Okay. Okay, and so what this website shows you is it shows you kind of a preview of the image data here, okay? And that's in this column. And then it shows you the model, okay? And so, all of these models they've been simulated in Vascular already. And so what you're doing for your project isn't anything new. And so, it's been done. But for you guys, it'll be new. Okay. And so what you're going to do for your projects is you're going to basically pick an image data set here, okay, to work with. And what you're going to do is what I want you to do for your projects is to basically recreate, first of all, the geometry, but also the simulation results from that as well. Okay. And so at this point, you can only do the geometry. And so we haven't learned how to do the simulations yet. And so we'll do that kind of the week before spring break. But what I want you guys to do, for now is to pick, first of all, which area of the body that you want to work with, and also, what, which model among these you're going to work with as well. Okay. And so when you're on this site, this site here is mostly just for browsing. So just do window shopping here. Okay. And so I have all the image data. So so don't pay any money here because I already have all the image data. Okay. So the only thing that you guys have to do is you just have to pick a model that you want, and you just have to give me the number of the model that you want to work with. Okay. And then I can send the image data to you. Okay. The image data is large, so it's burning like a 50 gigabyte hole into my hard drive right now. So I have all of them, but don't buy it. Okay, that's important. I don't want you guys spending any money on this. Okay? Right? And so another thing that you can look at here is you can actually view these PDFs. Okay, and so if you click on the PDF, you can read it, and here you'll actually see a report that someone wrote about this model. Okay, and so it'll give you a little bit of introduction to what these blood vessels are, and also why this model was run to begin with. So a lot of these models have some disease associated with them. Okay. And so that's kind of why we ran the simulation to begin with, was to investigate the disease. Okay. And so if you want to read more about the models, you can read the PDF. Okay. All right. So see, here's cerebral vasculature. So cerebral vasculature, they look pretty cool. I think they look nice. Okay. But then we can also look at other models like pulmonary models. Okay. And so these are the blood vessels that go into your heart, or to your lungs. Sorry. Okay. So you can see these are pretty intense too. Okay. Right. And so, do a little bit of research, browse the website a little bit, see what area of the body interests you, see what diseases interest you. And, and that's what you can do for your project. Okay. Right. And so I will give you some advice though. So, what you'll see from some of these models, like let's look at some of the pulmonary ones. Some of these models are extremely sophisticated. So if you look at this one, like this is crazy. Like this must have like, at least a few dozen outlets. Okay. And that's usually the case with pulmonary models. And so I will recommend that you choose a model that doesn't have too many outlets like this. Okay. So don't pick a model that looks a little bit too crazy, because, otherwise you're going to spend a ton of time just with the modeling. And so, pick one that's fairly more reasonable. I'm not saying that you can't do these ones, but, if you are going to pick a fairly crazy one like this, just be prepared to kind of spend a lot of time on your projects, because it's, modeling this many blood vessels is not a trivial task. Okay. And so the pulmonary ones, a lot of these just end up being kind of crazy. This one looks kind of okay right here, but, just kind of be careful about that. Okay. But I also don't want you to do ones that are too simple too. Okay. So, so most of these are okay, but you'll see some ones where it's literally just a tube, just a scraggly tube. Okay. And so don't pick something too simple like that. Okay. And so if you have any questions, you can definitely ask me for my feedback, and I'm happy to give that to you as well. Okay. And even though these projects are individual, so I want everyone to do them, I think with just the amount of image data that I have, I don't think I have enough to go around so that everyone gets a unique one. And so I think some people are going to end up doing the same image data. Okay. But I want everyone to kind of do the project, themselves. Okay. And so I shouldn't, what shouldn't happen is I shouldn't, get to the end of the semester and I look at your reports and you guys have literally the exact same model and the exact same simulation results. Okay. Because even though you're working on the same image data, there's still going to be some small differences based on how you did your segmentations and how you did your paths and how you did your simulations too. Okay. And so, so everyone still needs to do their own, but I think we're going to have to at least double or triple up on some of the image data, just because I don't have, that many. Okay. All right. And so, over the weekend, what I'll probably do is I'll formally type up some requirements for this project. So I know right now we're just kind of talking about it, but I at least wanted to show you guys just so you can start looking at the image data and thinking about what you want to do for your project. But I'll write up the formal requirements, by next week for you to look at as well. Okay. All right, so there are any questions on any of this? Oh, nice. Yeah, so someone posted the link for that too. Great. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so take a look. You know, it's fun in a way, right? So it's looking at these models is they're pretty cool, right? And learning about all the different cardiovascular diseases and simulations is a treat. So take your time. You know, don't get married to a don't get married to an image data or a model too quickly, because you know you might miss out on something that you might really like as well. Okay, and so with that, let's go back. Let's start the lecture for today. If my iPad will cooperate. Okay. Okay. And so where we left off last time was talking about, we were talking about arterial biomechanics, okay? Yeah, so the allometric scaling, we're going to talk about that. So that's going to be at the end of the lecture for today. Yeah. Right. And so again, the plan for today is to finish up our lecture notes on arterial biomechanics, okay? All right, so I actually believe, you know, the actual point that we left off on last time was this idea of wave propagation. Okay. All right, and so the idea with wave propagation has to do with the fact that, you know, because your blood vessels are flexible structures, whenever your heart contracts, you know, it's going to send pressure pulses down the length of your blood vessels, right? Very similar to how, you know, you can cause a pulse on a string. Okay. And actually, you know, I had a good discussion with someone after class last time of a kind of another real life kind of comparison that you can make, right? And so if you've ever driven past like a car dealership or or any kind of insurance company, you might have seen these kind of crazy guys, right? And so they're kind of, you know, they're these kind of I don't even know what to call it. They're made of plastic basically, and there's a fan underneath, and the fan is blowing air through them, so they're kind of, you know, like this and going like this all the time, right? Yes, wacky inflatable tube people. Yeah. And so that's another great example of wave propagation, right? And so if you think of, you know, those inflatable tube people as kind of flexible tubes, right? What you have there is you have air that's flowing through them, and those are causing pressure pulses, you know, to travel down the length of the inflatable tube guy, right? And so that's why you never see them kind of staying up like this, right? So they're always like deflating and then they're coming back up and they're deflating and coming back up, right? And so every time they deflate and come back up, that's the same as like a pressure pulse that's traveling down the length of the inflatable tube guy, okay? And so, you know, your blood vessels are kind of the same way. And so, you know, not nearly as wacky, but, you know, they have, that's kind of a good representation of those, of the pressure pulses, okay? Okay, and so, you know, I think the exact thing that we left off last time was the wave propagation speed, right? And so we talked about, you know, these pressure waves, you know, they travel down your blood vessel walls, but they do this at a different speed than the blood, right? And so if we draw the blood vessel like this, okay, and we know that inside the blood vessels, we have blood that's flowing through like this, okay? But then along the vessel walls, you know, you have your pressure pulses that are traveling like this way, right? And then what we said was that the pressure pulse propagation speed was much, much faster than the blood flow velocity. Okay. And so if you want to put some numbers on this, then, you know, depending on where you are from in the body, the pressure wave propagation speed can be anywhere between 5 to 10 times greater. And so it travels a lot faster than the blood, okay? All right. And so because you have these pressure waves traveling down the blood vessel wall and they're reflecting on the capillaries and coming back, what this is going to do is it's going to affect the pressure waveforms that you observe in the body, okay? Okay. Because you remember, from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about, the pressure waveform that occurs in the body, okay? And so what I showed you was a pressure waveform that just occurred just at one location in the body, right? And so, but, because we have this pressure wave propagation, the shape of that pressure waveform is going to be different, okay? And it really affects the pressure waveform in two different ways. And the first way that we talk about, or the first way that it affects their waveforms is that as you get farther away from the heart, the peak systolic pressure increases. Okay? Okay. And the reason for this increase is because, remember, as the waves travel down the cardiovascular tree, it's reflecting on the capillaries and coming back, okay? And so as those reflected waves, they interact with the incoming waves, they usually add on top of each other to create a bigger wave, okay? And so that's why as you get farther away from the heart, you kind of face the maximum effect of those reflections, okay? Because once they reflect, then they meet with the incoming wave and then they grow, okay? But the thing about the reflections is that, as after the waves reflect and they start coming back, as those waves start traveling back towards the heart, those reflected waves kind of go down in magnitude. So that's why, closer to the heart, you don't really feel the reflections all that much because the reflections have kind of died off by that point, okay? And so, but if you're far away from the heart, then you really feel these reflections quite a bit. And so that results in a higher systolic pressure, okay? All right. And so another effect that you'll see is that in addition to the peak systolic pressure being higher, it's also going to be delayed in areas farther away from the heart. Okay. And this has to do with the fact that, like we said, like it takes time for the pressure wave to go forward, but, the reflected waves that come back, this also creates, some, it also causes the pressure peaks to happen later as well. Okay. And so these are kind of the net two effects. So if you're measuring blood, if you're measuring blood pressure somewhere close to the heart, whereas you measure somewhere like in your arm or something, right? If you measure the blood pressure in your arm, you're going to expect to see a higher systolic pressure, and the peak is going to be shifted to the right a little bit. Okay. All right. And so on the next page, I'll kind of draw just an illustration of that. But are there any questions on any of this? Okay. So let me draw just kind of a picture just to kind of illustrate this for you. Okay. And so we draw an example graph near the heart. We might have something that looks like this. Okay. 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 Whereas far away from the heart, you might have a graph that looks like this. Right. And so you can see here the peak, I've exaggerated here. It's usually not this high, but this is just kind of to drive the point home. So like when you're far away from the heart, the peak systolic pressure is higher. And if you can see that this peak right here happens at a later time compared to this peak. Okay. And so this is an exaggeration. So it's not usually this pronounced, but this is just kind of just to illustrate the effects of wave propagation. propagation. Okay.
This is what's driving the blood, correct?
Correct. Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. And so another thing that we can, question. Yeah, so the question is, why is it higher there? So the reason it's higher there is because of the wave reflections, right? And so as the pressure waves travel down the tree, they're going to reflect off the capillaries, and those waves that reflect back, they're going to add on to any of the incoming waves that are going forward, right? And so those two waves are going to add together, and then they result in a higher peak in places that are far away from the heart. Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. And so the last thing I want to talk about is, factors that affect the wave propagation speed. Okay. And so I'll tell you right now that, characterizing the wave propagation speed is usually pretty difficult. And it's actually still kind of an active area of research, coming up with kind of a good formula for this. But there is kind of a relatively simple formula that's now it's kind of outdated, but, I think it shows kind of a good point. And so one of the early ways that people characterize this, they use this formula right here. Okay. And then all of these variables are labeled by the following. Okay, so PWV, that stands for pulse wave speed or pulse wave velocity. Okay? And then the variables in the equation are the following. So E is your Young's modulus for the vessel wall. Okay. H right here is the thickness of the vessel wall. So how thick the wall is, basically. Okay. D is vessel diameter. Okay. And then rho is density. Okay. And so a lot of these are important, but what I want to focus on particularly is the Young's modulus. Okay. Right. And so the fact that Young's modulus is in the numerator for this expression, what that tells you is that the stiffer your blood vessels are, the faster the wave propagation speed is. Okay. And so this is really significant because, as people age, so as people get older, what tends to happen is that, your blood vessels, they tend to get stiffer as people get older. And that's due to a lot of kind of biomechanical, biochemical factors that are kind of, probably better served for a real biology class. But, in terms of, pulse wave speed, what this tells you is that, older people, they have their pressure pulses are traveling a lot faster in their system just because their blood vessels are getting a lot stiffer. Okay. And so what tends to happen then is that these effects that I've shown up here, the fact that you have higher systolic pressures farther away from the heart, these tend to get more pronounced for older people. Okay. And so as your blood vessels stiffen, then you just kind of naturally, keeping everything else the same. And so, say that your diet and everything is just fine. You're just naturally going to get a higher blood pressure for older people just because their blood vessels are stiffening up. Okay. And unfortunately, there's not much you can do about it. I mean, you can do your best to live a healthy life, but just despite your best efforts, old people just have their blood vessels get more stiff, and so that results in higher systolic pressures. All right. So any questions on any of this? Okay. Okay. And so let's talk briefly about blood flow patterns in the cardiovascular system. So I don't want to say too much about it because I want to make sure I get to allometric scaling so you can do your homeworks. But I do want to make a couple comments on this. Okay. All Right. And so in particular, let's talk about flow patterns and turbulence. So actually, I think, some people out in the class have asked about this a couple times before. And if you remember, from your previous fluid classes, turbulence, it's characterized by, a very chaotic, unpredictable flow. Okay. And so usually, turbulence is, as an engineer, you're usually not happy to see turbulence because that means, your analysis just got literally like probably 100 times more complicated because turbulence is really, really hard to deal with. Okay. And so the opposite of turbulent flow, which is, what makes people happy, is laminar flow. Okay. And so laminar is characterized by, order. I like to call it orderly flow. Okay. Okay. And so generally, as a fluid mechanics analyst, you want to be in the regime of laminar flow because that's generally a lot easier to analyze. Okay. And so the way that you determine whether your flow is turbulent or laminar is you compute what this thing called the Reynolds number. Okay. Okay. And so this is Reynolds number. Okay. And so the Reynolds number is computed by this formula here. Okay. Right. Where rho, this is density of the fluid. Okay. U here is the fluid velocity. D is the diameter. Okay. And mu here is the viscosity. Okay. All right. And so what you can do for blood flow and for any fluid flow is you can compute the Reynolds number, all you have to do is kind of plug in all of these factors here, okay? And so after you compute the Reynolds number, if you find that the Reynolds number is less than 2300, okay? And this is true for pipe flow basically, so flow in a tube, then what this means is that your flow is laminar. Okay. Which is good because laminar flow, we want laminar flow because then it's easier, much easier to analyze. Okay. And unfortunately, the unfortunate thing and the thing that makes fluid mechanics so difficult is that a lot of flows tend to be turbulent. And so they begin to be really difficult to analyze. Right. But the fortunate thing about blood flow, right? The thing about blood flow is that our diameters are really, really small, right? So we're talking about blood vessels that are, centimeters or millimeters in diameter. And so what tends to happen for blood flow is that most of our flow is actually laminar. Okay. Okay. And so this is great. And so, the fact that we're working with such small diameters, this tells us that, we're working with laminar flow most of the time. And so that really helps simplify our calculations. So that's really good. And which is nice too, because in Vascular, when we run the CFD inside Vascular assumes that the flow is laminar. And so that's really good. And I will say that, in the world of fluid mechanics and engineering, this fact right here is very, very unique. And so for a lot of, engineering systems with fluid mechanics, unless you're working with something like microfluidics, a lot of times you're going to be dealing with turbulence. So the fact that, we're not dealing with turbulence here is a big blessing. Okay. Of course, we have a bajillion other things to make our life difficult, like wave propagation and, all this other stuff. But at least in terms of turbulence, at least we don't have to worry about that in cardiovascular flow. Okay. I will say though that there are some cases where when you kind of observe blood flow in the cardiovascular system, it might look turbulent, And so this might be when, flow comes out of a valve, for instance, right? But it's not really fair to call that, true turbulence, because the speeds aren't really high enough to get, to reach the turbulent regime. But, what you can call that then is kind of more, I would say, more disturbed flow, or flow that kind of exhibits some turbulent properties, but isn't technically turbulence. And so, when you're analyzing, your blood flow, you're going to see that we use kind of straight up Navier-Stokes for that. And the reason we can do that is because the flow is laminar. Okay. And so, there's a lot more I can kind of say on this topic here, but just for now, just kind of remember that blood flow is laminar, and that makes us happy. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. So let's talk about let's next shift gears and let's talk about some of the forces that our blood vessels feel. Okay. I'm still green. And so as blood flows through your blood vessels, they're going to exert some forces on your vessel walls, right? So let me draw a blood vessel here, okay? And then we have blood flow that's coming throughout here, okay? Right. And so as this blood flows through, it will exert forces on the wall. And so, in particular, I'm going to talk about two categories of forces, right? And so, the first force that I want to talk about is pressure forces, which exert a normal force. Okay, so let me erase some of this. Okay. And because just like we've been talking about all this time, like blood flow is a pressurized flow. And so it needs that pressure to kind of drive the flow forward. But because we have, pressure within our blood vessels, that pressure is going to exert some force on the outer walls. Okay, so all of these are pressure forces. Okay. And notice that they act normal to the walls, and so they're kind of pushing against the walls on the outside. Okay. Another category of forces that we'll talk about, which we've mentioned quite a bit in this class already. This is the wall shear stress. Okay. And so remember, the wall shear stress is the viscous friction force that the blood imparts on the wall. Okay. So as the wall kind of flows past the vessel wall, it's going to want to drag some of it with it because of viscosity, and then that exerts a wall shear force, wall shear stress. Okay. And just like we've talked about before too, that your blood vessels are lined with living cells. Okay. Okay. And so because they're lined with living cells, they can actually sense these forces, and they can actually react to them as well. Okay. And in particular, what your blood vessels like is they don't like anything new. Okay. And so they're like the friend that likes to go to the same restaurant all the time, right? So even though you tell them, you like this other food too, they still want to go to that same restaurant, right? And so your blood vessels are kind of the same way. And so, they're kind of exposed to a steady diet of forces all the time, and they don't really like changes to that at all. Okay. And so what your blood vessels tend to do is they tend to adapt their shape in order to make sure that they experience the same forces all the time. Okay. And this particular behavior of the blood vessels to do this is known as mechanotransduction. And so what we're going to be talking about is, what are some, how do particular forces, how do they cause your blood vessels to change their shape in general? Okay. All right. So question in the chat. So how is this affected by exercise, like regular exercise? Yeah. No, that's a great question. And so when we talk about abnormalities in the forces that the blood vessel feels, these are forces that are kind of exerted over long periods of time. And so, even if you exercise regularly, right, and like when you exercise, that it results in an increase in blood flow, those forces usually aren't sustained over long periods of time. So like we're talking about like months. That's the kind of time scales that we're talking about for mechanotransduction. And so when you exercise, even if you exercise like a few hours a day, there's large parts of the day where you're not exercising. You kind of return to your resting, your resting conditions. And so, in order for a force to kind of cause your blood vessel to actually adapt its shape, it has to take place over long periods of time. So we're talking like months or weeks at the very least. And so, even if you exercise, you'll see, of course, you'll see a lot of benefits to your cardiovascular system if you exercise. So it'll remodel in some way. But in particular for these ones, these are kind of longer term changes that usually come about as a result of disease. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a great point. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Oh, question. So like if someone ran a marathon a day, would they literally be built different? Yeah. Yeah, that's one way to think about it. I mean, you run a marathon every day, there's going to be a lot of other changes in your bodies, but your blood vessels would also kind of adapt to that too. So you would have to kind of sustain that for a really, really long time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so let's talk about mechanotransduction, and let's talk about how it can cause some changes. Okay. Okay. All right. So first, let's talk about the wall shear stress, right? And so we've already seen, when we developed Murray's law, that the branching pattern in your cardiovascular system is such that it tries to maintain the same wall shear stress all throughout. Right? Okay. And so even for the bigger vessels and the smaller vessels, it tries to branch and split the flow such that you have basically the same wall shear stress all throughout. Okay. But let's talk about individual. So that's kind of a system as a whole kind of thing. So that's kind of like a system-wide design thing, right? But there might be some cases where individual vessels might experience wall shear stress that are outside of its equilibrium value. Okay. And so this usually happens, just like I kind of mentioned before, because of disease, right? And so, like we've talked before about, like if plaque kind of causes one blood vessel to kind of clog up, all that flow that used to go to that blood vessel might go down another one too. And so that results in, a much higher wall shear stress just because you have much more flow going down, right? Or it could be like a longer chronic condition too, where like maybe there's a global pandemic and you haven't exercised for several months. And so your heart's just not putting out as much blood as it used to, okay? And so that's gonna lower the wall shear stress just because you don't have as much blood flow that's going through, okay? And so, for individual vessels that, they experience wall shear stress that's outside of its equilibrium, what it can do is it can actually adapt its diameter in order to kind of maintain that wall shear stress, okay? Okay. And so kind of the adaptation kind of takes this form, right? And so if we have kind of the base blood vessel diameter here, okay? And so this is kind of you're looking kind of straight on like this, right? And then let's say that something occurred in your body, and now this blood vessel is experiencing a wall shear stress that's way too high. So it's like way too much wall shear stress, okay? Okay. And so in those cases, when your wall shear stress is too high, what you want to do is you kind of want to alleviate some of those velocity gradients that are near the wall, right? And so because remember, the way you compute wall shear stress is you take the product of viscosity multiplied by your velocity gradient, okay? And so if your wall shear stress is too high, you want to kind of alleviate those gradients a little bit. And so one way to do that is to basically expand your blood vessel, okay? And so you can kind of make it bigger. Okay. Because what this will do is it'll kind of spread that velocity over a larger surface area, and then that kind of results in a lower wall shear stress, okay? And so if the wall shear stress is too high, then the blood vessel will basically expand itself to kind of restore the wall shear stress value that it liked, okay? And then the opposite is true as well, okay? And so if you have, say the wall shear stress is too low, okay? Okay. And so this might be a result of, of someone just not doing physical activity for a long time. Okay. In those cases, then your blood vessel will actually shrink. Okay. And so, it shrinks to basically, concentrate those velocity gradients kind of within that vessel wall so that you get a wall shear stress that's, you kind of bump that wall shear stress up. Okay. And so this is kind of just one way that, the wall, your vessel wall can kind of respond to wall shear stress. Okay. And that's why it's such an interesting quantity for people to measure in people's cardiovascular systems is because they have these kinds of effects. But normally, it's really hard to kind of measure wall shear stress because you have to compute the velocity gradient, which normally is very difficult to do. And so this is where CFD really comes in handy because from a CFD simulation, you can compute wall shear stress just really, really easily. And then from that, you can draw a lot of really interesting conclusions. Okay. All right. So any questions on this so far? Our question. So similar to why bodybuilders have large veins. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure this is part of it. Another part, might be what we'll talk about next, which is, when you increase when you put kind of more tensile forces on the blood vessels, that also causes some changes as well. But yeah, I think this whole idea of mechanotransduction, I think that also contributes to that. Yeah, so why specifically they get really large veins, I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure it's a combination of a lot of things, but I'm sure mechanotransduction is part of that as well. Okay. All right. So that's wall shear stress. And so let's talk more. Let's talk about tensile stresses. Okay. And so this is actually a stress that I didn't draw, in the earlier figure. But this happens to everyone, right? Because everyone starts out as a tiny baby, and then they eventually grow into an adult. Okay. Because as you can imagine, as a tiny baby, your vessels are, a certain length. Okay. But as you grow, your blood vessels have to grow as well. But the mechanism through which your vessels grow, it's actually a response to stress, just like wall shear stress. Okay. And so vessel length also responds to stresses. Okay. You get large veins in your head during midterms and finals. Yeah, I'm not sure what causes that though, but I'm sure stress is a big part of that one as well. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so let's talk about this, right? So let's say that you have a blood vessel here, okay? And so just kind of an innocent blood vessel. And let's say that this is in a younger person, and as the person grows, say that their limbs are getting longer, then what's going to happen is that it's going to pull the blood vessel like this, right? So in other words, you're basically stretching you're stretching the blood vessel out. Okay. And so, just like we talked about, blood vessels, they don't like to experience stresses that they're not used to. So whenever that happens, they adjust their geometry in order to account for this. And so the way that they can adjust for this to alleviate that stress is that they can just get longer. Okay. 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 And so if you get a longer blood vessel, right, then you're just not going to experience as much stress. Right. And so this is kind of another way that your blood vessel can adapt its geometry according to its mechanical environment. Right? Yeah, large demand for blood flow. Yeah. Okay. And so this is tensile stresses is another way to do this, or way another mechanism for mechanotransduction. Okay. And the last one that we haven't talked about yet is pressure forces. Okay. But before I get to pressure forces, I do want to say that your blood vessels, I've been kind of very careful to say that, it's not that they don't want stress, right? Because no matter what, like you have a pressurized tube and you have viscous wall shear stress. So there's always going to be some stress, right? And so kind of just like engineering students, blood vessels are in a constant state of stress. Okay. And so actually, if you ever get the opportunity to work with a cadaver, which is basically a dead person that donated their body to science, what if you actually cut out their blood vessels and actually take it out and put it onto your table, what you'll see is that the blood vessel will actually kind of shrink in on itself and kind of close up, right? And that's because those are kind of the internal stresses that the blood vessel was feeling, while that person was alive, right? And so there's always that feeling of stress in the blood vessels. It's just that your blood vessels they like to just maintain that level of stress. So they kind of have accepted that they can never get rid of the stress, right? So just like engineering students, and so you kind of accept that you can never get rid of stress, but you can at least manage it and maintain it at a certain level, right? And so that's what blood vessels kind of aim to do, is they just try to kind of maintain that same level of stress. Okay. And so let's talk about pressure stresses. And so these are normal stresses. Okay. And so normal stresses arise, particularly from pressure forces. Okay. Okay. And then, just like we've seen for the wall shear stress, and just like we've seen for the tensile stresses, the blood vessel can adapt its geometry if it faces, pressure forces that are outside of its equilibrium. Okay. All right. Any question on this? All right. So does diameter change as well as length? And so actually, for normal stresses, you actually see that there's one more mechanism of change that we haven't talked about. So, all of these guys are linked. So for wall shear stress, that typically changes your inner diameter or the lumen diameter. Okay. And so tensile stresses that will affect the length of the blood vessel. And for normal stresses, what you'll see is that actually affects the thickness of your blood vessel wall. Yeah. Right. Does stress make them more effective or efficient? Yeah, that's I guess it helps them be more efficient because that stress actually in the vessel walls also contributes to the wave propagation as well. And so I guess without that stress, you wouldn't have that that propagation, right? Because like if you think about it, when you have the pulse on the string, if you don't pull the string, like you just kind of have it just sitting on the table, it's not going to propagate a pulse. And so you need some tension in there in order to do that. And so this stress, I'm sure, helps with that as well. Okay. All right, so let's talk about normal stresses. Okay. And so just like we talked about, a normal stress is going to apply stress like this, okay? Okay. And then if we kind of cut this blood vessel in half, we can, if you kind of remember from your previous classes on maybe, like a pressurized vessel, okay? This kind of normal force is going to result in a circumferential stress around the vessel wall. Okay? And so if we kind of just put half the blood vessel like this, right? The fact that we have normal stresses here, okay? In order to balance these normal stresses, inside the vessel wall itself, there needs to be some circumferential stresses. Okay? And so that's what I have in blue right here. Okay. And so when the pressure changes in your cardiovascular system, the way that your blood vessel can adapt to that is that it actually changes the vessel thickness. Okay. Okay. Because as you can imagine, if you want to spread out that circumferential stress over a larger area, you can increase the thickness, right? And so let me draw kind of the figure to kind of show you, right? So let's say that we have a standard blood vessel here, okay? And let's say that, the blood vessel wall is thick like this, okay? Right. If you have an increase in pressure, what your blood vessels will tend to do when you have high blood pressure is it'll make your vessel walls thicker. Okay. Okay. All right. Whereas if you have a lower blood pressure, say like your Michael Phelps or something, right? What that'll do is it'll actually thin out your vessel walls. Okay. Right. And if you think about, some of the other effects that we talked about before, about, how when older people get, as people age, their blood vessels get stiffer, and so that causes wave propagation to go faster, and that causes your blood pressure to rise. Okay, a rise in blood pressure will also, result in thicker vessel walls too, right? So all of these things that we've been talking about, they're all connected to each other, and they all have kind of, reciprocating effects. Okay. And so the whole system itself is extremely complicated. So, usually one change in something, right? Like say you have, high blood pressure, that's going to cause a chain of events that's going to cause, a lot of other changes in your system as well. Okay. Because, you usually don't want your blood vessel walls to be too thick, because that's usually a risk factor for some other diseases as well. Because what that does, it allows more area for plaque or fat to kind of insert themselves into your vessel wall, and that causes its own, risk factors as well. So a lot of these, cardiovascular diseases, a lot of them are vicious cycles, because one thing will cause another thing, which will cause another thing, which will cause something bad to happen. So, it's amazing in some ways, because it's amazing because a lot of these systems, were kind of designed just naturally through evolution. But they were able to they were able to devise such a complicated and sophisticated system like this. Yeah. All right. Oh, so question. So how does pressure act when making the walls thicker? So when so when you increase the pressure, that's going to increase basically the circumferential stress on your vessel walls, right? And so your blood vessel doesn't like that. So it doesn't like to see an increase in circumferential stress. And so to kind of alleviate that and to kind of spread out that stress over a larger area, what it does is that it makes the vessel wall thicker, so that circumferential stress is kind of spread out over kind of a larger thickness versus something like this. And that'll basically alleviate that, so that your blood vessel doesn't experience that high value of stress. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so any questions on this? Okay. And so, we have about 20 minutes left. So I do want to skip to allometry. And so just to make sure that you guys can do your homework assignment. Okay. But there is one more section that I want to talk about briefly if we have time at the end. But let's go to allometric scaling, just so that you guys can do your homeworks. Okay. All right. And so when we talk about allometric scaling, we're actually talking about other species. Okay. And so, up to this point, we've mostly just been focusing on human cardiovascular system. But, we're not the only thing on this planet that has a heart and blood vessels and things like that, right? So all animals, all living organisms on this planet, and maybe other planets too, if you believe in aliens, like all animals need some kind of system to transport materials, right? And so for animals that are close in biology to humans, so say like like dogs or sheep or stuff like that, okay, they have a system that very closely mimics our own. So they have like a heart and blood vessels, and the heart pumps blood. Okay, but if you look at some other creatures like insects have a transport system that doesn't involve a beating heart, and so they have kind of what's called an external cardiovascular system. But we're not going to get too much into that. Okay. And so, if you think about it like that, a lot of things, or a lot of things that we usually measure in the cardiovascular system, like things like heart rate, things like blood pressure, things like, let's see, blood vessel diameter, okay. All of these things are going to vary between different species, right? Because each of the different species are, they're typically different sized, right? And so we're much bigger than like a cat, but we're also much smaller than like a grizzly bear, right? But all of these creatures, they still have a cardiovascular system, and even though they're different, there's some connections that we can make in between different species. Okay. So in other words, all of these cardiovascular parameters will scale according to the animal size. Okay. And and kind of the reason for this is that different sized animals have different demands for their cardiovascular system, right? So if you think about like a grizzly bear, right? A grizzly bear is a much bigger creature, and so they have much stronger muscles, and they have much stronger needs to for blood flow, right? So they're going to have much different needs than, than an engineering professor who just sits on his butt all day during a global pandemic, right? But we can draw some connections in between different species, right? And this is the whole field of allometry. Right? And so let's give a definition now. So allometry, this is the study of the relationship between body mass to the shape, anatomy, and physiology and other behaviors of certain animals. Okay. Okay. And so, believe it or not, even though, we're mostly interested in human cardiovascular flow, studying animals can actually, be really helpful as well, right? And so you probably heard some, if you ever, listen to the news and you heard about, some kind of new drug or new vaccine or new treatment, the first place that we usually test these things is we don't test them in humans. So we usually test them in animals first, right? And how ethical that is and how humane that is, that's a conversation for probably another class. But right now, the standard practice is to kind of, before we test, things that can be potentially dangerous to humans, we test them in animals first, right? But when you test things in animals, like you have to kind of remember that animals, the functions and the demands of their cardiovascular system are not the same as humans, right? And so if we want to take those results and we want to apply them to humans, we have to do some calculations. We have to do some scaling in order to make that happen. Okay. Right. And allometry is basically the way that we actually do that. Okay. And thankfully, for the cardiovascular system at least, a lot of allometric relationships follow what's called a power law relationship. Okay. And the power law relationship basically relates a certain property according to the body mass raised to a particular exponent. Okay. And with this relationship, actually, it becomes really simple or really easy to actually compute, what the heart rate would be in like a cat or something like that, or what the blood pressure would be in like a grizzly bear. Okay. And so the formula is actually pretty straightforward, but I'll show that on the next page. And then I'll show you how you would actually use that for problems like you see on the homework. All right, any questions on this? Okay, so let's go over that power law relationship. So the power law relationship looks like this. Right? And so if you have some property y, okay, so y at this point could be something like heart rate, it could be like blood pressure, it could be something else, okay? What the allometric relationship says is this is equal to some y naught, where y naught in this case is not a Pokemon, but it's a reference value. Okay. And so this reference value is going to be different for every type of property, but thankfully, we're not going to need it. So it's it's kind of more of a placeholder than anything. Okay. Multiplied by m, where m right here is the body mass. Okay. And so that's just kind of the general mass or the average mass for that kind of species. Okay. And then we raise it to the power of b. Okay, where b right here, this is our allometric exponent. Okay. No, I not anymore. That's a past life for me. Okay. And so this, relatively simple formula, we can use this to compute, how things differ from different species. Okay. And so the only thing that we need in this formula right here is we need to know this value of B. Okay. And so B is going to change or depends on the type of property that we're looking at. Okay. And the way that we determine these B's is usually by experiment. Okay. And so what people did was they basically measured the average heart rate for a bunch of dogs and a bunch of humans, a bunch of giraffes, elephants, grizzly bears, dogs, for a bunch of animals. And then what they did was they kind of fit a curve to these to this data according to their mass. Okay. And then from there they determine the B. So the B, it's not some magic thing. So you can't derive it from like Newton's laws or anything like that. You just have to just run a ton of experiments and a ton of different animals for this. Okay. And so here's some examples for some values of B that are useful for the cardiovascular system. Okay. Okay. All right. So first, let's do heart rate. Okay. And so heart rate, the B value for this is going to be -1/4. Okay. Right. And so the fact that the exponent is minus there, what that tells you is that, for creatures with smaller creatures with smaller mass actually have a higher heart rate. Okay. And so, my fiance worries about this all the time. So like we have a cat, and she's fairly old. And every time we kind of, bring our ear close to her chest, we can hear her heart pumping really fast. And then my fiance is like, oh no, like, Angel's heart's beating so fast, like, is something wrong with her? I'm like, no, babe, it's only because she weighs 15 pounds. That's why she's actually, she only weighs like 12 pounds. Like she weighs 10 times less than us. So that means her heart rate is just naturally going to be a lot higher than a human's heart rate. Okay. All right, so next is stroke volume. And so stroke volume is, you can think of stroke volume as the amount of blood that gets pumped out in every heartbeat, okay? And then the B value for stroke volume is equal to 1, okay? And so, I don't remember if we covered stroke volume yet, but this is amount of blood output in one heartbeat. And so it gets this name because in one stroke of your heart, that's the volume of blood that comes out, okay? And so the fact that the B value is 1 here means that, stroke volume scales linearly with body mass. And so for a creature that's twice as big, they're going to require twice as much blood to go through their body at any given time. And so that makes intuitive sense, right? So because bigger creatures have, more demands for their cardiovascular system. And so their stroke volume has to increase to compensate for this. Okay. Next is blood pressure. Right. And interestingly enough, the allometric relationship for blood pressure is that there's no relationship, right? And so what scientists have found is that, the blood pressure in, no matter what size of the creature that you're looking at, is about the same. And so every creature has about the same blood pressure. And so that's kind of, pretty significant. All right. And so the last one that we'll talk about before we do an example is vessel diameter. And so vessel diameter has a B value of 3/8. Okay. Right. And so this exponent is positive. And so generally, as the creature gets bigger, your blood vessels are going to get bigger, but the growth rate isn't as fast. And so, for a creature that's twice as massive as you, they're not going to have blood vessels that are twice as big. They're going to have a blood vessel that's 2 raised to the 3/8 power bigger than you in general. Okay. All right, any questions on this before we jump into an example? Okay. So let's actually put some numbers on that cat example that I just mentioned. Okay. Okay. And so let's say that you're an average human. And so let's say a human. And let's say that a human person weighs 150 pounds. Okay. And let's say that you have a resting heartbeat of 60 BPM. Okay. And so BPM stands for beats per minute. Okay. And so in every minute, basically your heart is beating 60 times, right? So that's approximately one time. That's 1 time per second. Okay. And so let's say that you want based on your heart rate, you say that you're an averagely healthy person, and so for your averagely healthy cat, who weighs 15 pounds, what would their heart rate be? Okay. All right, and so to solve this, we're going to use our allometric relationship power law that we saw before. Oh, 210. Wow, that's pretty high. You should probably get that checked out, unless you were exercising. If you're exercising, that's a little bit better, but still a little bit high. Okay. Okay, and so from the previous page, we know that the B value for heart rate is -1/4. Okay, and so what we can say is that the heart rate is equal to y naught, which is our reference value, times mass raised to the -1/4 power. Okay. All right, so right now we don't know what y naught is, but it doesn't matter because we're just going to cancel it out in the equation. Okay, and so let's set up this equation for both the human and the cat. And so for the human we know the answer already. So for the human, we have 60 BPM. Okay, this is equal to y naught times its mass. And so I'm going to just plug in the weight right here, but weight is because of the way we're going to factor this problem, we're going to cancel out the units for everything. Okay, and so I'll just plug in 150 pounds raised to the -1/4. Okay. And then for the cat, what we're going to do is, since we don't know this heart rate, so we're going to keep it as an unknown, and so we'll call it y, okay, is equal to y naught times 15 pounds raised to the -1/4. Okay. All right. All right, so I basically just applied that allometric power scale to both the human and the cat. Okay. All right, and so what we can do from here is we can divide both equations by each other. Okay. And so if we divide both equations, that's going to eliminate y naught. Okay. And so what we get is 60 over y is equal to 150 over 15 raised to the -1/4. Okay. Right. And so now what we have is just one more unknown. And so now we can just solve for y. Okay. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. So let's go ahead and finish up these calculations. Okay. And so if we manipulate this equation and we solve for y, what we get is y is equal to 60 beats per minute times 1/10 raised to the -1/4. Okay. And then we just simply punch this into our calculator, and what we get is 106.7 beats per minute. Okay. And so just like we predicted, and just like you would experience if you put your ear right next to your cat's chest, is that you'll see that a cat has a higher heart rate than humans because it has a smaller mass. Okay. Any questions on this example or anything that we covered today? Okay. All right, so we're out of time for today, so it's 6:45, and so now you should be equipped to finish everything on the homework. So definitely, get started on that. And then next week we're going to start a new topic called lump parameter modeling. Okay, and so this is where I think this is kind of the nice final thing for our first big unit, because we're going to take a lot of the knowledge that we've picked up, especially in this past week, and then see how we can actually model that. Both with equations and then actually solve them in MATLAB. So, it's going to be a lot of calculations, but I think you guys will enjoy it, because it'll be, it depends how much you like circuits, but, it'll be our first time working with MATLAB. So it'll be fun. Okay. All right. So thank you guys for tuning in today. This is our last lecture of the week. So have a good weekend, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Oh, back one page. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Professor?
Yep.
Did you mention that we have to email you for which model we want?
Yeah, so definitely take a look at those. I'll set up a formal sign-up sheet probably sometime over the weekend. I want to write up kind of the formal project requirements first, but I at least wanted to show you the website just so you can start looking. And so why don't you hold off until I create that sign-up sheet, and then we can do it then.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend. So the website I think it was linked earlier in the chat, but the way that I usually go there is I usually go from the Vascular website. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. And so the way that I usually go there is I go to www.vascular.org, and then I click this this button for repository. Okay, so repository is basically the database for the medical image data. And then I'm going to click this button for Visit SV Model Repository. Okay. And then it'll take you to this website. And then from here, you click the button for Repository. And then from here, you can check out all the different models here. I'll send the link. I'll send the link out in an announcement right after class just now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Did you guys have any more questions?
Professor, it's a question regarding FEA.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
For the recent homework that was due a couple of days ago, I'm having difficulty getting the results on some of the displacements.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure. I'm not getting the results, but I don't want to turn it in. But is that okay? Are you going to give us partial credit on that?
Yeah. So I mean,
not correctly the results.
So the homeworks for, this applies for this class and finite elements. So I only grade those homeworks based on completion. And so I do look at your work, and if I do see something that I can give you feedback on. So like I see your stiffness matrices are off, then I'll let you know. But for those homeworks, as long as you did every problem and I can see that you gave a good effort for it, then I give you full credit for that. So that's usually my policy with my electives, because it's because my electives just kind of tend to have high enrollments, and so it gets a bit tough to kind of keep up with the grading for everything. But I also feel like if you signed up, if you kind of willingly took that elective, then you kind of want to be there. And so I
was it's just I think it's just it's the arithmetic. I'm not sure what maybe the rational roots that I'm putting in, or on MATLAB too. I don't know.
Yeah, I would just turn it in at this point because it's, you know, because it almost feels like looking for a needle in a haystack with those kinds of problems, because it's you know, it could be like literally one small error, you know, that's causing the whole thing to kind of be messed up. So I think, you know, I don't want you to, you know, take too much time on it. So turn in what you have right now. As long as you did every single problem, I'll give you full credit for it. And if I find something when I'm looking through your work, then I'll give you feedback on it in the
Okay,
the
great.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Professor.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Alex, Steven, did you guys have any more questions? Okay, so there's no more questions. I'm gonna go ahead and close the call. So have a good weekend, and I'll see you next week.